Welcome to Saturdays at 7, Christian Scholars Review's conversation series with thought leaders about the academic vocation and the relationship that vocation shares with the church. My name is Todd Ream. I have the privilege of serving as the publisher for Christian Scholars Review and as the host for Saturdays at 7. I also have the privilege of serving on the faculty and the administration at Indiana Wesleyan University. Our guest is Makoto Fujimura, independent artist and author. Thank you for joining us.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
In 2019, the New York Times columnist David Brooks referred to your work as, quote, a small rebellion against the quickening of time, end quote. In other places, your work is referred to in Japanese as nihonga, or in English as slow art. Would you begin by walking us back to the 19th century origins of nihonga, what brought it into existence, and against what pressures it might have been working?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, for that question. Nihonga is a term that was coined in the 19th century, but it harkens back way before that when Japan became, have its own unique identity as a culture. I would say about 8th century, and the materials used, minerals and basic materials that is at the time shares in common with medieval, let's say, manuscripts, gold, silver, malachite, azurite, lapis, and jewels, as well as calligraphy ink, oyster shell, usually on paper or so. Nihonga, commonly known, is mostly known in Japan as salon art. There are Nihonga salons that you belong to, and they're very much supported by the nation and so forth. But I tend to be more on the contemporary art side, so I use Nihonga materials to do new things. But the reason why I insist on slowing down and using minerals, pulverized minerals, and I mix them by hand here in my studio in Princeton, is that the process of art to me has always been meditative. It definitely, the sacred process of praying and to discovering, being aware of what is happening in front of me. Certainly, people think of representational art versus abstract art, but I do not see my art really in either category. It's about representing the invisible into visible. So that's the process that I draw upon to slow down and to really pay attention to what is happening in front of me, what is happening around me, but also what is happening inside of me.
Thank you. That process then calls forth from the artist, from you, that experience. What then do you hope your art is designed to call forth from those who encounter it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for me, art is really a way, creating a portal for people to walk into. And each person has a unique journey and a unique way of moving into a work of art. And my job is to make it generative as possible, and to hopefully it will be intriguing enough for even those who may not share the same faith with me or the worldview would feel invited into. Art is hospitality in that sense, that to create a portal for anyone to be able to stand under something more transcendent and therefore more beautiful. And so for me, it's an exercise also in humility. I try to do work, not necessarily in the marketplace. Let's say it's my art is really designed to be a gift to the world. And obviously, I work with galleries and the transactive market as well. But that's not the reason why I paint. I paint to create meaning, to help people find whatever it is that they have the language to bring into a work of art. And it is like listening to a conversation,
Mm.
and hopefully that conversation asks deeper and deeper questions.
Thank you. From the perspective of the artist, then, the one who
Mhm.
creates, can you walk us through this process? Perhaps, for example, a
Yeah,
painting. So, from
yeah,
inception to completion, where does the idea come? How do you select the materials? How
yeah,
do you arrange them in relationship with one another and know when it's done?
yeah. So typical question, right? I get asked this a lot, like how long does it take you to do your work? And it takes a lifetime. It takes a lifetime of trying to paint and fading a lot, and then you get to a point where you are able to find your voice in the very limitations that you have. Actually, it's a process of distilling who you are and what you are called to do, and so that takes a while. And I'm at a stage, I suppose, where I know my limits, and yet I'm always endeavoring to break beyond them. And that's the challenge of being an artist is, you're not just doing the same work over and over repetitively and in an industrial sense, you're always generating something new into the world, hopefully. So you're always taking risks. Materials are fundamental to that discovery. That's why I use very imperfect polarized minerals rather than industrial materials, let's say, that are designed to be accurate and
Mhm.
exact. Um, mine takes advantage of the imperfections or thrives off of that. And so the process is very slow. Even if I'm traveling, let's say, or away from the studio, I'm always painting my head. That's always the case, and my writings flows right out of my studio flow of my work. So I don't consider them to be separate at all. They're
Mm.
part of what I do. Even my travels, my journeys. If I am lecturing about this book, it will be really straight out of studio experience, and it's again slowing down, paying attention to what is around me, being surprised always by what the world brings. Calvin Silveld, who just passed away, but he said there are burning bushes everywhere. We just stop taking our shoes off. And artists are the ones that I think are intentionally keeping their shoes on and standing in front of this enigmatic mystery in front of us all the time, stopping to see, smell, touch, and then we hopefully create something out of it that helps others to do the same. So when you walk into my studio, you see so many different types of minerals and materials, and I am constantly communicating with, nihonga is an ecosystem. It's not just a technique and materials.
Mhm.
It's ecosystem of families, generations of paper makers, brush makers, people who prepare pigments for a certain grade and certain purpose, and so you're working with them constantly to gauge what you want to create into the world. And so I talk about that a little bit in the book. Art is a journey into the light book as a way to describe what happens when I'm walking into a studio. But it opens up to this journey into Japanese culture and Korean culture and Asian cultures that really allow us a glimpse into this generational stewardship
Mm.
of beauty, integrating nature with beauty and bringing out something in the world that is hopefully enduring out of these very ephemeral experiences.
Thank you. In addition to being referenced as being representative of expressionism, your art, slow art, nihonga, is often referred to as creation care. In what ways are the materials and the way you work with them in
Yeah.
terms of the art you offer the world? What way is that an expression of creation care?
Yeah, it is. And, caring for your environment, caring for culture, I coined the term culture care because I saw partly that creation care is impossible without culture care.
Mm,
What I mean by that is culture care is all about languages being cared for, how we speak, how we talk about issues. We can be politically divided, but we need to find common ground to be able to speak to one another. And in our divided, polarized times, it's really really a matter of our own survival to be able to do that. And art brings in that language of mediation and even peacemaking. And so when we find ourselves divided and even in some sense alienated from nature, that everything about our relationship with natural world has become this, polarized reality, we need to find new ways of understanding what nature is. And by the way, that is really connected with um, who we are as humans. What
mm,
is a human? Uh, that is a key question today, and especially in light of technology. And so, this question of integration of nature and humanity, which is culture, culture is exactly that. But we have divorced culture from in an industrial sense, where we made it into utility and pragmatism. And that creates this way of dehumanizing us ultimately. And so, the reason why we're struggling to be a steward of the environment or nature is because we are alienated from the humanity in us.
mm.
And that's where art comes in. That's where artists are so good at instinctively and intuitively. They may not even realize they're doing it, but they're integrating the divided, fragmented reality into something beautiful. And they are not the ones to create ideological framework for that. But they are intuiting a lot of different um, polarized realities, fragmented realities, and pulverized realities, and they're creating something beautiful out of that.
Thank you. I want to ask you now about your calling to art and how that came about. You earned an undergraduate degree from Bucknell University, double
Mhm.
majoring in animal behavior and art. I like that. We'll come back to animal behavior here in a
Yeah.
second. And minoring in creative writing. At what point, though, did you discover art would play a considerable role in how you understood yourself and your vocation?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. It was my freshman year, first year. One of the great things about liberal arts education is that you're able to push yourself and ask deeper questions about yourself, your identity, what you're made to do, as opposed to getting a skill and then applying that to a job, which is not unimportant, but but it is one of the great gifts that I received in liberal arts education is to be able to search for, try out things, and first see what you're not good at. And growing up in a family of my father was a brilliant scientist, and I just assumed that I would go into the sciences. And I was intrigued by this interdisciplinary study of animal behavior, which is a lot of things combined, psychology and biology, and even environmental sciences, ecology. And so I was more interested in the interdisciplinary nature of that than perhaps the science, the rigor of science itself. And I discovered very quickly that, what I'm interested in is the thought behind the thought, thought behind why these things exist. Why are we interested in animals or plants or the sky or the universe? And so I began to read literature, and I began to do what I do today, which is to paint and write out of that experience. And I couldn't write then, so it took several very good professors who took time to help me to understand what the discipline of writing meant, and to be able to harness that. Today I have authored 5 books, and back then, if you told me that would be the case, I would not have believed you. Writing was one of the hardest things that I thought I was encountering in college. And it has given me a gift of discipline to be able to sit down and write, every week, no matter what the topic was, that it was important to write things down.
Yeah.
And so that kind of led into what I know. But as I spend a lot of time, and I was fortunate to even complete my degree in sciences, as well as art, and a place like Bucknell allows you to do that, and I'm to this day grateful for that, because that super integration has continued to be in my life. I'm painting in here, but I am fascinated with monarch butterflies that are flying right now in Fuji Farm here in Princeton, and because I planted milkweeds, they're coming now in abundance, and they're laying eggs, and these things fascinate me. That again, nature and culture are connected, and we get to, as human beings, harness the generative reality of nature into this struggle to create the future, which is what art is.
Yeah.
And that allows us to bring the invisible into visible spheres. So it is, what I call face journey, which is really seeing the value in the mystery of what you see and mystery of what you don't see, right? And artists are trying to do both. And these thoughts are not alien to scientific, discoveries. Both sides share in that. And as I discovered with my father and so many, great friends who are scientists, engineers, these are some of the things that I've discovered along the way. But I knew that when I articulated that I should try to be full time as an artist. I didn't know what that meant. I don't know if you can even do that. But when I felt like that was, in a sense, I could not do that. It's just, this is something that I must do.
Mhm.
And whatever outcome, ways of making that work would be secondary to that call that I felt I had. And I used that word, calling, very early on, even though I was not a Christian at the time. I didn't know who was calling me. But I discovered that, indeed, there was a voice that spoke to my heart very early on as a child, painting something, and I felt this flow, energy go through me. And I didn't know what that was. I thought everybody had that experience. So, I found out that you don't talk about these things in middle school, or people make fun of you. But, I really had this visceral experience that just connected the spiritual with the visual, and especially seeking beauty was just something that I did every day, even as a child. So I think that became very obvious to me the first year of college.
Thank you. You then traveled to Japan and earned a master's in art from Tokyo University of the Arts, which then also offered you the opportunity to stay and earn a doctorate. In what ways did traveling to Japan also prove formative in terms of your vocation as an artist?
Yeah, I was born in Boston. My father was doing his postdoc research, and so I I chose American citizenship as a teenager, but I decided to go back to Japan because every time I painted, there was a sense of this longing for
Hmm.
my roots that I couldn't reconcile. So I was able to fortunately get a national scholarship to study in Japan for a year and a half initially, and placed in this very prestigious program at Tokyo University of Art that allowed me to really study what I wanted to see was especially 15th to 17th century art, that Japanese art that I had access to museums around Tokyo and anywhere that I wanted to see these works. They will allow me to go in and examine them firsthand. And after a year and a half, they invited me to apply for MFA program there, and I accepted. The Japanese government was paying for that, so it was a no brainer really at the time. And then I was then invited into this really once in a lifetime opportunity to study with a master, two masters, but nihonga masters who were one of the best, the artists of the time, and I'm to this day the only outsider, let alone a foreigner, that was allowed into this lineage program. So I was able to spend 6.5 years in Japan, and that formed definitely something awakened in me when I encountered these materials, Nihonga materials. Um, it really was like a glove fitting your hand perfectly because I walked into these Nihonga shops in Tokyo, and I described this in my book, this experience of seeing jars of beautiful minerals lined up, beauty flowing through the centuries of Japanese culture. And when I got them to use as a student, my professor said, "Well, you really have to work with the best materials to
Hmm.
understand how to use them." And so that meant not eating lunch, like, so that I can afford these and things. That's right. But I did that, and I had since then committed to use only the best. And later on, when I was reading the Bible, I realized that's what artisans in the Bible did too. It's an offering, so you have to use the best materials. So I continued that discipline, and so I found out very quickly that these materials suited my temperament,
Hmm.
as if I was born into them, and so I began to very quickly master difficult techniques that would take normal students, 4 years to master. I was able to figure it out in 6 months. So I knew my temperament was suited for this, but the question is what kind of expression would I produce? Because Nihonga can be very very much tied to tradition in a way, in terms of motif and themes. And I think what I brought into that genre was something as an outsider, a fresh way of honoring the tradition, and then creating something that would be universally relevant.
Hmm.
So that meant that I would go back to New York or New Jersey, New York area to exhibit in New York City, and there'll be a natural overlap between what I was showing, as you noted, abstract expressionist tradition, and Nihonga as well.
Thank you. This approach to art, as you described, and the way it sort of took hold in your life, I realize this is somewhat of an unfair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is there a painting that comes to mind that is sort of more representative of this way
Hmm.
of approaching your work than perhaps others? And if so, Could you describe it? I realize this is asking
Yeah.
someone, which one is the favorite of your children?
Right,
That's the
right,
question.
right,
I'm
right.
sure that, but
Well,
yeah, but
yeah,
it's
but in terms of representing the culture, I mean, a lot of my works try to do that. I have this working behind me. I don't know if you can see it, this gold work, which I just pulled. And the way that this particular way of gilding gold works came directly from my master that I learned under Matazo Kayama, who is arguably the best 20th century artist that Japan had. He grew up in Kyoto in a family that designed kimono patterns, and he had this understanding of gold. Gold is gilded in sheets, and they're microscopically thin, so it's ridiculously difficult to work with. Good gold, you can literally see through. So he's teaching us a technique of how to gild this gold in different ways, and I am modifying what he taught me then, taught all of us then here. But it was his kind of language of talking about gold that affected me deeply, which was not just this kind of dedication and discipline to the craft, but his love for them, that how important gold is in Japanese tradition, and his history of painting is when Japan was coming out of war and they had nothing to eat. He realized that's when he has to paint with gold. So it's this scarcity that he was bleakness, black, dark, full of ashes. He saw all around him, and he said, art has to transcend this somehow. And so his effort to bring back 17th century Rinpa tradition, what's known as Rinpa tradition, which is gorgeous using gold and silver and precious minerals, into 20th century is the work that I'm carrying through to our time, and living and working in Ground Zero, New York City for a long time. I came, face to face with that reality, and I had to invoke him, to say, well, I'm continuing your work to create beauty into this wasteland, darkness, brokenness, ground zero experience. And that has caused me to see that, the materiality of Japanese past is not just so that it looks beautiful and extravagant and it catches your eye, but there's a deeper sense of this dedication to life that flows into these beautiful works. And to this day, I see that in the works of, especially in 16th and 17th century works, which was the time of feudal wars. So very violent, very bleak time in Japanese history.
Thank you. I want to transition now to asking you more formally about your writing. You've mentioned some of it already.
Yeah.
In particular, your newest book, Art Is. But you mentioned on at least one occasion that you also write books between paintings. So
yeah,
you spent a lot of time writing and spent a lot of time painting. So
yeah, bro. There's a lot of time in between, right? But this started at Bucknell. I would be sitting there in the Opron, and I had to write to pass, and but then it became a discipline that never left me. After Bucknell, I would be. I was in Connecticut for a short time, and then I was trying to paint, and then I was working at a special education school. But as I am painting, I am reflecting on thoughts and things that I have encountered, and I had to process them somehow, and so I write essays, uh, but that I never thought I would publish them, but I would just work on a few things, and then after 9/11, I had this opportunity to help U.S. government, being on the National Council on the Arts, to help arts organizations, and so I would be waiting at the airport a lot, and um, that I would be writing, just naturally thinking about what I would say to encourage these leaders and artists and people that I will meet. And that became my first book, and so I, I think just writing has become part of me. But I would say it was one of the hardest disciplines to learn, to harness, and I'm grateful for that.
Art is arguably equal parts memoir and artistic philosophy,
Yeah.
which, when mixed together, yield what is also a wonderfully illustrated book.
Yes.
If I may, did you learn anything more about yourself and about your
Yeah.
calling as an artist as a result of writing this book, especially the memoir side of it? Are there
Yeah.
things that came forward that perhaps you didn't anticipate when you began the project?
No, I didn't, and thank you for pointing that out. My editor, Jennifer Banks at Yale Press, who published my earlier book, Art and
Mhm.
Faith: Theology of Making book, and I was thinking, well, I would write another book based on that theme, and it was during the pandemic, as the pandemic was waning. She said, actually, I would love to have you write about what you see, and
Mm.
I thought about that. I said, well, I do see a lot, but at the time, I wasn't sure if that will be, or could be, or should be a book.
Yeah.
So I wrote the first couple paragraphs, which is basically this 25-meter walk from my house to my studio. And it's literally this short walk. And I came into the studio one day. This was still during the shutdown. And I wrote that paragraph. And and then I realized, oh boy, I carry in so much by the time I enter into the studio. My senses are awakened by what I see. I'm hearing things, I'm feeding things,
Mm.
and that all comes with me, and the first stroke that I make is all part of that. And so that paragraph became, a chapter, and the chapter became a book. And so it was, as you know, there was a discovery process for me of finding that words and observations that I take care to expound upon has a life of its own.
Mhm.
Just like my paintings, I really rely on what is already there to guide me, and so it became this very much a journey into the light is the subtitle, but this journey into something mysterious and abounding, and something that really sheds light into my own heart.
As with your painting, what do you hope people who, and again, I strongly encourage them to do so, who read this book, what do you
Mm.
hope they encounter when they read
Yeah,
it?
I have found that, and this took me a while to realize this, that what I see actually is helpful for people. you know, like it's not just for
You
my
seem
own.
surprised.
I am completely surprised until I wrote this. Yeah, until I wrote this book, I really didn't believe it, and I remember people like asking me, uh, you know. like there's something really wonderful
Mhm.
about how you see the world. Can you describe it or something like that? And I'm like, well, doesn't everybody, you know? And then I realized that no, there's a responsibility to this, you know, and I have to help in some way articulate this because we are so divided in this
Mhm.
culture. It's black and white, and we create false binaries all the time. So it's easy to sell things. It's easy to market things. It's easy to make the news. The more shocking it is, the better. And we lost this capacity to see nuances and complexity without reducing them, um, which is so important, right? If you imagine a dish, a recipe made in that way, like totally just false binaries, and uh, like we would taste it when we would say, oh, it's too salty, or not enough salt, but that's it. Like we lose all of the other flavors, the color, the reality, and we don't think that's good. But
Mhm.
in the public discourse today, even in our Thanksgiving dinner conversations, we don't know how to do that. And, to accept that the world is complex and messy sometimes, but it can be also beautifully messy.
Mhm.
That artists, if you listen to jazz, you see so many musicians on stage who share very little with each other. Like they're not like this. They literally don't have the same sound. Not the same instruments. Even backgrounds are different, right? You may have a Japanese guy playing with an African American guy playing with a Polish guy. And we are fascinated by that, right? And we see goodness in that, but we don't see it in public discourse
Mhm.
in generally. When I articulate what I see complexity and beauty, and chaos that is full of energy that can lead into harnessed into something expansive. That's what an artist uh, is trained to do. Um, then I realized, oh, so that may be an antidote to this
Mhm.
cultural wars polarity, a world in which we lost, our hearts have grown cold. And we do not know, who's going to speak into this world in ways that actually helps people to live fully as humans
Yeah.
and to be able to communicate with the other that may be different or even opposite of what we believe. That is the challenge of this day. So I began to take that as a kind of a um, open challenge to myself to be able to talk about it. And art is as a book moves from the personal to more public
Mhm.
realities that literally pragmatic ways that we can help to see the world
Mhm.
in its full complexity and appreciate them.
Whether as an artist or through painting or as an artist through writing, calling forth this sense of understanding of the world, then
Yeah.
what virtues do you believe are most important to cultivate? And perhaps also what vices are most important to be aware of and perhaps confront?
Yeah. So art is all about listening.
Mm.
Even what I do as a visual artist, I'm listening to the flow. I'm listening to the colors. I hear things. And I think we need to be able to listen to each other before we stake our positions and argue for the right certain positions. There's great mystery in what is human and great mystery in the world, nature, in the skies. And again, we do not take our shoes off to slow down and appreciate them.
Mm.
And I think we have lost that sense of wonderment and mystery that is at the heart of the universe, actually. But because we lost sight of that, and playfulness that we
Mm.
need to discover anything. You ask the best scientists, that's what they'll tell you, is that, it's taking out in a walk with a friend that
Mm.
suddenly trigger that great thought, or, just being able to see this wonderment in the skies. And so I think that is a critical task for humanity to rediscover, especially for younger generation who inherited this anxiousness of this culture. We need to release ourselves from this false binaries and technology that forces you to take a side and be able to walk in a field and discover something entirely new that you never thought existed. And so I say listening is probably the greatest reality that we're missing today.
As we close, I want to ask you then, in what ways can artists be of greater service to the church? And
Mm,
in what ways
mm,
can the church also be of greater service to artists?
yeah. So the church is the artwork of God, right? Ephesians 2, 8 through 10. For God, by grace we have been saved. It's not of yourselves, so no one may boast. And we are God's workmanship. That is
Mhm.
a industrial translation of the word poema. So we are God's poems. We're God's masterpieces, created in Christ Jesus to do good works or hard works. They're gone. And so if God is the artist, and I make this case in my previous book, is God is the only artist, real true artist who creates ex nihilo, creates in love, pure love. None of us can do that, unfortunately, but we are prone to create idols all the time. But if we attune our hearts and listen to the Spirit, we can create something because of God's invitation to create into the new, something that is enduring, something that lasts beyond what the capacity of this side of eternity can hold. And so that invitation is a remarkable promise to this world that the church can harness and bring together a community of people who disagree with each other or who may, be have completely different histories as a background to come together in fellowship and break bread. And that is, I think, the greatest gift. That is so winsome that if we are able to do that, to be a child of God under the table of Christ's sacrifice, right? To be able to together create something new into the world so that we are all makers in that sense, that the church becomes the most creatively abundant space that is known in your neighborhood. Then we don't need to share Christ, because people will just come to us. And I've seen this happen over and over in different communities and small samples where, if we are simply be able to share our brokenness together as brothers and sisters in Christ, to be able to open ourselves to the vulnerabilities and challenges of our day honestly, without wearing masks, and be able to share that grace has met me this day, and I am here not because of myself, but because God has instilled in me this desire to be part of a community that is bigger than myself, community that is beautiful, beautifully broken, beautifully complex. Then I think the world is going to look at that and say, what an enigmatic burning bush that is. I can't figure you guys out. You're not, this, you're not that. No, we're all of the body of Christ, right? And yes, broken. And yes, we go through terrible pains, but our Lord has guided us with Jesus's wounds, right? Still visible, that we are able to find healing in. And so that reality, the church as an outwork of God, is the most potent antidote to everything you think of: war, poverty, injustices of the world. That's the answer that Jesus is giving us. So to me, as an artist, I want to create works that point to that reality, and to really reveal things that create this unveiling of the reality of God in front of us. But also, as an artist, I want to bring justice into the world, because justice is a flip side of the same coin of beauty. And we want to do what we can through our work to create a portal for people to be able to integrate those two together, beauty and justice. And then the church is a place where every single member, every single part of the community can celebrate that together, to have, as Richard Foster said, discipline, celebration of discipline that leads into celebration of common communion.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Our guest has been Makoto Fujimura, independent artist and author. Thank you for taking the time to share your insights and wisdom with us. Thank you for joining us for Saturdays at 7, Christian Scholars Review's conversation series with thought leaders about the academic vocation and the relationship that vocation shares with the church. We invite you to join us again next week for Saturdays at 7.